All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Misinformation and the Election in Michigan, What to Expect 2020 Town Hall. My name is Grace Linzer, and I'm on the Membership and National Engagement team at PEN America. For anyone who's not familiar with PEN America, I just want to give you a brief introduction to our work. So for almost 100 years, PEN has stood at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the United States and worldwide. Today, in the midst of a global pandemic and an unprecedented election, PEN is continuing this fight through the What to Expect 2020 campaign. And this campaign aims to combat the surge of misinformation and disinformation that poses a threat to our free and fair elections. This effort includes disinformation defense workshops, community-level virtual town halls, and events with journalists and community organizers at the local level, like this one tonight, and a wider variety of other resources that you can check out at pen.org. That's pen.org. There you can check out our tip sheet on how to talk to friends and family who share misinformation. You can take our interactive quiz to test your election disinformation knowledge, and you can learn more about how you can spot, check, and stop misinformation. I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight and give special thanks to our speakers, Nancy, Agogo, Kate, and Laura, for taking time out of their busy schedules to share this hour with us. And many thanks, of course, to our moderator for this evening, Sharon Delente. Sharon is joining us from the ACLU of Michigan, where she is the voting rights strategist. Tired of years spent playing defense attorney and voting rights strategist, Sharon wanted to engage in a game-changing effort to ensure full and fair access to the ballot for all Michigan voters. And that game-changing effort became Proposal 3, or Promote the Vote, a ballot initiative that Sharon played a key role in writing and leading, which was overwhelmingly approved by the voters of Michigan in November of 2018. As a result, all of Michigan's registered voters can access an absentee ballot without giving a reason. Citizens will be automatically registered at the Secretary of State, and citizens can register to vote right up to and on Election Day. Sharon has participated in voter protection efforts since 2004 and also has more than a decade of experience in private practice, both in civil rights and criminal defense. Today, Sharon continues the fight for full and fair access to the ballot. So we're really honored to have her leading this conversation here tonight. Sharon, thank you so much for doing this, and I will pass it off to you to get us started.
Thank you so much, Grace and PEN America, for having both myself and all the wonderful speakers that we're going to hear from on the panel tonight. So, and thank you to everyone who's joining us. We're really honored to have you with us, and we hope you enjoy the presentation and the panel this evening. So my first job is to introduce these amazing panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Nancy Wang. Nancy is the executive director and a founding member of Voters Not Politicians, the grassroots group that led the successful 2018 ballot initiative campaign to amend the Michigan Constitution to put voters, not politicians, in charge of redistricting here in Michigan. This election cycle, VNP launched the Vote Safe campaign to protect public health and the integrity of our elections during the COVID-19 pandemic. Through the Vote Safe program, VNP volunteer teams have helped to expand voting access for 780,000 Michigan voters in 17 cities and townships. And VNP has educated voters statewide on their safe voting options. Nancy is an attorney and received her bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Michigan and her law degree from the University of Michigan Law School. So thank you, Nancy, for joining us. And our second panelist is Agogo Adebie. Agogo is All Voting is Local's Michigan State Director. Prior to joining the campaign, Adebie worked as an attorney for Wayne County, Michigan, and was a candidate for the Michigan House of Representatives in 2018. Agogo has been actively involved in voter protection efforts since 2010, primarily recruiting and organizing fellow attorneys to be poll workers and poll watchers on Election Day. A Detroit native, Agogo has a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Michigan and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Michigan Law School. So thank you, Agogo, for joining us. Our next panelist is Kate Abby Lamberts. Kate is the co-founder and editorial director for Detour Media. She leads editorial strategy for the signature Detour Detroit newsletter, The Blend, and special projects, while shaping Detour's membership program, audience development initiatives, and design. Kate was previously a national reporter at HuffPost, where she covered equitable cities and urban issues. She launched HuffPost's Detroit Vertical, serving as reporter and editor, and has reported on Detroit for a decade. Thank you for joining us, Kate. And our fourth panelist is Laura Herberg. Laura is a community reporter for 101.9 WDET, telling the stories about people inhabiting the Detroit region and the issues that affect us here. Herberg is a 2019 Summer Inequitable Development Fellow for the Race and Justice Reporting Initiative at the Detroit Equity Action Lab, a program of the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights. She was also named the Michigan Associated Press Best Reporter for Radio Broadcasting in 2018 and 2017. So thank you all, panelists, for joining us. So let's start with Kate and Laura. Speaking from each of your own areas of work, what role does local journalism play in the 2020 election?
Hi, everyone. A big one, I guess, is the first answer. I like to think that we can be, with so many changes happening this year, so much different about the way that you cast your vote, as well as so much on the ballot that people aren't aware of. We would like to be a one-stop shop for Detroit voters, to be able to learn what they need to know to vote safely and confidently. Those are simple words, but really, really important ones, and two things that I think are really challenging for a lot of people right now, trying to figure out how to vote. So that's, I think it's very simple, but just so crucial, and that's kind of where we're standing on that.
Yeah, and I just want to echo kind of what Kate's saying, and actually Detour is one of our partners, because at WDET we've also identified that kind of the big issue this election is voting itself. So we're still covering local issues like Prop 1, Prop 2, Proposal N, even things like term limits in Sterling Heights, but we're really spending a lot more time and energy on what we see is the big story, which is ensuring that people know how to vote and they know how to make sure that their vote's going to count.
All right, so now turning to Nancy and Agogo. As civic engagement organizers, what are your priorities for the coming weeks, or I guess it's really just one and a little bit ahead of November 3rd? What are your priorities with the remaining time we have left before November 3rd?
Yeah, well, we know that there are record numbers of absentee ballot requests that have already been made, around 3 million now in Michigan, which is tremendous. And, we've spent a lot of time with ACLU and, partners like All Voting is Local, trying to get out the information so that people felt confident to request an absentee ballot and to vote absentee. And now we want to make sure that that message is out there, and that people who are sitting with their absentee ballots know how to turn them into a drop box or at their local clerk's office or a satellite voting location in advance of Election Day. But then also that the people who are whose voting plan is to vote in person on Election Day know where to go, know the kind of the hours at their local clerk's office and that kind of thing. So we're really trying to support both in-person and absentee voters leading up to Election Day.
Yeah, well, I would agree with everything Nancy said. I think the biggest thing is we've got to educate our voters and make sure that everybody knows what their options are. You have 3 options to vote. You can either go in person to your clerk's office from now until the Monday before Election Day. You can vote absentee by getting a ballot mailed to you, although we suggest at this point not to do that, and just to drop it off at a Dropbox or go into your clerk's office, or go on Election Day and vote in person. But I think the biggest thing that I got to emphasize to folks is to make a plan to vote. And I think we also have to make sure that voters feel supported in voting. I think there are unprecedented times. We're having an election in the middle of a pandemic. And I would encourage anyone who has any questions or is concerned to call the voter protection hotline at 866-RVOTE and make sure that you get the information that you need to be supported in making your voice heard this November. And we're also just making sure that everybody's protected and has everything they need.
Thanks. Okay. So we also know that this year we're seeing a lot of misinformation used as a tool of voter suppression to promote division, to cast doubt over the integrity of our elections, and to influence the election's outcomes. Not only is misinformation prevalent on our social media feeds, but we are also seeing it spread by our state and national leaders. Nancy, how are you and other voting rights advocates confronting misinformation challenges and getting trusted information through to voters?
Yeah, so our group, we got involved because we wanted to make sure that people knew what their safe voting options were during the pandemic. And I think we relied on two main strategies. One is to connect with local leaders and trusted validators to get the message out. So in Detroit, for example, we are running a program called Detroit Votes 2020, where we are closely partnering with trusted leaders like the Detroit City Clerk, the mayor, and the Secretary of State's office. And we're having high profile events at satellite office locations and that sort of thing, knowing that people understand that when their local clerk is saying, these are the various locations where you can go to vote, or these are the Dropbox locations, that message is going to break through. We're also partnering with local cultural leaders like the Pistons or the Detroit Lions, trying to reach people also who, where those messages can kind of get attention and be shared. And then the second part of that, I think, is also just making sure that we are committed to making sure that the information we're putting out there is 100% accurate. So again, that's where the partnerships with Secretary of State's offices, where we're getting the original source of the information. One of the projects that we've been partnering with All Voting is Local, for example, is to develop a tool at MichiganDropbox.com where anybody in the state can go and look up very quickly where their Dropbox locations are that serve their city or township. And for that, we put our volunteers to work so that they could verify every single piece of information about clerks, hours and Dropbox locations with the actual city and township clerks themselves. So that takes a lot of work, and and there was a lot of kind of sharing of information and updating that in real time. But again, I think that goes to credibility. And and if you have the trusted validators and people know that the information you're bringing to them is accurate, then you're more likely to speak to people and get them the information that they need to vote.
And Gogo, what is All Voting is Local doing to keep voters informed of their voting rights now during early voting, as you mentioned, and then on Election Day?
Yeah, I just want to back up Nancy on this. We did partner with All Voting is or not All Voting is Local. We're All Voting is Local. Voters Not Politicians on MichiganDropbox.com, and we developed a video, a minute-long video amplifying the website and showing voters how they can take advantage of these wonderful options that Proposal 3 gave us in 2018. But also making sure that we are prepared for whatever could happen on Election Day, and making sure that there's a rapid response team, and working with your organization, Sharon, and the ACLU to make sure that the boiler room is well staffed and there are a number of attorneys there ready and willing to go. And also just, I think we all have to understand in this space that, we're kind of a unique breed. shortly after my 18th birthday, I took a bus to go to the Secretary of State's office to register to vote. Most people don't do that. And most people don't know all the ins and outs of election law like we do. And so it's really our duty, given that we have this fountain of knowledge, to spread it and talk to folks that, like we're doing tonight, and make sure that people are comfortable with the voting system that we have.
All right, thanks. So let's hear from our other panelists. So Kate, as a reporter, describe your role in reporting on challenges and instilling confidence in voters.
Yeah, so I am by no means an election law expert, but I still want to echo that. What we've seen is just like, you can't say it enough. It becomes to feel very rote, and like we must be boring or turning away our readers by saying, I don't know, I think I've written the word Dropbox or satellite voting center like 400 times in the last couple weeks. But because of the way our social media platforms work, people are busy, what they're actually reading or just skimming. There's so many people who haven't seen those words. And so making sure that we, in every story about the elections, have that crucial information, and making sure that it's easy, it is reader first, not kind of reporter first, in terms of making sure they can get every piece of information they need in one place. And we've made that as clear as possible and kind of hit them over the head with it as much as we can. The other thing I would say is that we have to know what those challenges are, right? Like there's obvious ones when there's big changes, like we didn't used to have Dropboxes and now we do, but there are more minute things or things that don't seem as huge. And I kind of have a approach, it's felt like no problem too small. A reader of ours in our kind of reader Facebook group talked about a weird spammy political text they got, and we checked it out, and it turns out that it wasn't spam, there was no scam attached. That'll be reported out as a story soon, but it's being able to know where people are actually having not just the misinformation, but the potential for distrust, and being able to either see if there is a real problem, or if not, find that out and let them know, and also let the rest of our audience know, because if one person has experienced something and tells us about it, probably many more people have as well.
Kate, what you described sounds very similar to what we deal with on the hotline, sort of figuring out what happened, what exactly the email was. We do a lot of that. The boiler room and hotline that Agogo mentioned does a lot of that, sort of, what is the problem you're facing? Let's understand it so then we can help you. Yeah, I hear you on that. So Kate, as a reporter, describe your role in reporting on challenges and instilling confidence in voters.
So I'll use an example of a recent story I did. I was interviewing the Macomb County chair of the Republican Party, and he mentioned that he felt that voter fraud was a big issue, and if the president wasn't reelected, it would be because of voter fraud. So as a journalist, when you have a claim like that, you need to look into it. So I wanted to find out just how common voter fraud has been in Michigan. And I checked in with the Secretary of State's office, and I also looked at the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank that tracks instances of voter fraud. And I found only 5 cases in Michigan in the last 10 years, and only 2 that had to do with absentee voting. So for us, if there's misinformation out there, a big way to address it is to just fact check it. So that's just one example of what we're doing. There's a lot of misinformation out there, but I actually took the story and kind of flipped it a little bit and showed that while there's only been a few documented instances of voter fraud in the last 10 years, if you just look at the last primary election, there were a lot of instances of voting errors that kept people from being able to vote. So we know that about 10,000 ballots went uncounted in the August primary because of issues such as the ballot didn't arrive on time, the signature was missing or it didn't match what was on file, a voter moved, and even in 31 instances, people forgot to put their ballot inside the envelope. So these voting errors actually are much bigger issues than voter fraud. So we want to pay attention to fact check, but then also pay attention to, the real issues that really can make a difference as to whether or not your vote's going to count.
Thank you. And Laura, I apologize. I didn't scroll. I have too many screens open. I didn't scroll down fast enough. So I apologize for that. And if I can, I'll just say, on that issue of voters making errors, I think it's great to share with everyone that there's really 3 things that you need to know. You need to know to get your ballot back by 8 p.m. on election day. You need to know you need to sign it. And you need to use your official signature. Those are errors that are very solvable. And of course, put the ballot in the envelope as well. I'm going to have to add, it's going to have to be 4 now. 4 tips, Laura. Thank you so much. And I apologize for calling you Kate. All right. So part of the success of misinformation is the way it sows discord, undermines confidence, and threatens our sense of shared knowledge. And quite frankly, as someone who's been doing this for a long time, I'm really having to spend a lot more time this year understanding how misinformation operates. So starting with you, Kate, as a journalist, how do you weigh whether or not your reporting may feed a narrative that is harmful or erodes the public's confidence in the election against your obligation to hold people accountable and report on what our leaders are saying? And I'm curious if you've had any ethical dilemmas and how you sort of worked that out.
Yeah, I think we have a dilemma, if not an ethical one, with nearly every story with this election, just in terms of, and also, the pandemic has been great training for that because of the different kinds of narratives and rapidly changing information and the potential for real harm. Where every kind of decision about, from what we cover to what sourcing we use to how we may tweak a headline or which piece of information we put first, like all of those things on a story level and a larger level can make a real difference in terms of what kinds of messages people get. The piece about that we've learned, which I should have pulled up the real stat, but just the way that seeing misinformation, even in a fact-checking article, can kind of take root in readers' brains so they don't remember the fact check, they remember the original misinformation, is something that I think we kind of wrestle with anytime we're dealing with something like this. So, to some extent, I don't have a great answer. I think in Detroit, the idea of trying to hold officials accountable without discouraging people from voting, without making them feel that their vote won't get counted or won't matter, is so important. And some of the ways that we're doing that is, one, trying to weigh what actually affects people's ability to vote. If we hear of something that's annoying or seems not great, but isn't going to actually make a difference for people, we don't need to add to the noise of some of the issues and frustrations people have had with, like, for example, the clerk's office. And I also think it's important to report on when things are going well or going fine. That feels really important right now. It's the kind of a boring story to write, but to say, actually, sounds like there are enough poll workers right now in Detroit. We'll wait and see what happens, but it is important to kind of talk about those things as we also try to make sure we are really clear when things are going wrong in a critical way.
I appreciate those stories about what's going well. For all of us voting rights advocates, it's nice to hear some things are working. And I think you're absolutely right. Election officials deserve to be acknowledged when it's going right. So, all right, Laura. So Facebook said it would prohibit ads that make premature decisions about the election, as well as ads that delegitimize the outcome. For example, this would include calling a method of voting inherently fraudulent or corrupt, or using isolated incidents of voter fraud to delegitimize the results of an election. Is Facebook's response sufficient? What do you think needs to happen to combat the issues it is working to address? And what advice would you offer to voters in Michigan to check for misinformation and to find sources that they can rely on for truthful information?
Yeah, I think I'm going to focus on the last bit of your question, because at this point in time, there is going to be misinformation out there. And so I really think that it's on the responsibility of all of us to not be naively a part of the problem. So if you see something and it kind of blows your mind, I think the main thing is just to not immediately retweet it or share it. First of all, open it up and read it. You'd be surprised. We can tell how many people engage with our content on social media that don't even click on the link, which is really discouraging. So click on the link, see what it says, see when it was reported, and then kind of Google it and see what other people are saying about it. Just like with anything, I would hope you wouldn't take just one person's word, see what the other outlets are reporting. I saw a story not that long ago that actually Newsweek was reporting that had to do with ballot harvesting in I think it was Minnesota, it might've been Wisconsin. And I was like, whoa, Newsweek is reporting this. It's probably legit. But then when I Googled it and saw what some of the other outlets are reporting, I saw that Newsweek didn't really get the whole story. So do your due diligence. If there's a claim made, make sure that it's being substantiated and it's not just a quote with, nothing backing it up. I mean, I think about everybody. Probably most people have been through high school. If you were writing a research paper, you wouldn't have been able to get away with saying, like the King of England invented education without like citing your sources. And it's the same thing with credible media. There needs to be like legitimate sources behind information, and basically you just don't want to be a part of the problem, and it can happen to anybody. I almost retweeted something the other day where someone was calling into question a photo, and I thought, oh yeah, like I see what they're saying, and it kind of blew my mind. And then I kept reading the comments, and all these photographers weighed in and were like, no, this is a legit photo, and I'll tell you why. Luckily, as a news media person, I always pause, because it would be mortifying to me to retweet fake news. It just wouldn't be a good look. But really, it's not a good look for anybody, especially in these times. It's just not a good look. So we all just have to do our part and take a deep breath, count to 10, maybe come back to it tomorrow, but just don't be a part of the problem. If you're not sure, just please don't continue to spread that information.
Take a deep breath, pause, wait a day. I think that's good advice for everything other than voting. Go ahead and vote today. Don't take a pause on that. And maybe now is also just a good time to mention, a really reliable source that folks have really been trying to push really across the country this year is the National Association of Secretary of State site. So the individual secretaries of states and their sites. And so for folks here in Michigan, right, that's michigan.gov/vote. And so that is, the Department of State, the official chief election official in the state's information. And there is a tremendous amount of voter information on there about where voters can go to find a satellite office, a drop box, where their polling location. And so I really encourage everybody to check that out if they haven't, or just, keep it on your phone for when someone asks you, where do I find whatever? You can probably find it on michigan.gov/vote. So, all right, Nancy and Agogo, how are you combating misinformation in your own work now and long term? And what do you think needs to happen to combat this issue? And what is our election system in Michigan doing right for voters statewide? Agogo, you want to go first, and then we'll go to Nancy?
Yeah, well, I want to really congratulate and give props to the Secretary of State and the Attorney General for being very aggressive and pushing back on disinformation and misinformation this election cycle. I think one of the biggest crucial things that happened in regards to our election system is the Secretary of State sending out absentee ballot applications to every single voter in Michigan. Now, that was controversial, but I think it allowed a lot of people to understand more about the election system than they would ordinarily, and to be aware of this whole other tool. And I think going forward, what we have to do is make sure that the system is as transparent as possible, that we give clerks plenty of time, plenty of resources to serve their voters, so that we have a well-run election system is the best way to combat misinformation. If you're confident in your election system, people can say whatever they want, but you're not going to believe it because you're confident in the results, and you're confident in your clerk, and you're confident in the system. So there's a lot more work that we all have to do going forward after this year to improve our election system, but I'm really grateful for the leadership of Attorney General Nessel and Secretary Benson this year, and making sure that the tools that we do have are being used to its fullest.
Yeah, I really agree with that, the thing that speaks loudest to voters, I think, is to see a real election administration that's working, right? And I know that there are challenges out there, but what we saw in Michigan during the primary was that the information that the Secretary of State was getting out there, that groups like ours were getting out there, that local media is getting out there, were kind of getting through to voters, and voters very confidently were voting absentee in record numbers. And again, we're seeing that in November. So I think, it's just a commitment of all of us to keep communicating with voters, accurate information, multi channels, like in all the different ways that people get their information these days. And then also for me, I take a lot of comfort in knowing that in Michigan, thanks to Prop 3, like absentee voting, universal absentee voting is a new thing, right? We don't have that history of everybody being able to vote absentee for no reason. So this is really the first general election where everybody has that opportunity. And I think the fact that, again, 3 million people at least are going to be taking advantage of that opportunity is a huge success, and I think speaks volumes to what everybody is been able to do this election cycle to give people the information they need and the confidence they need to vote in whatever manner, including absentee, that they wish. And then I think from here on out, there are states like Colorado that have been voting, all mail voting for decades, and their voters, regardless of party affiliation, know that, like their mail voting systems are secure and safe and convenient. And so I just think that our experience here in Michigan is just going to continue to build on itself, and voters will see from their personal experience that this is, a really trusted, secure system that works for all people, no matter what their party affiliation is.
Sorry, I was a little tricky with my mute button there. Thanks, Nancy. All right, so Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities, especially here in Michigan, have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. I know all of our panelists know that. Policy decisions made in the past 4 years and mis and disinformation surrounding these pieces have impacted this. So first to Laura, what are journalists doing to center and support disproportionately impacted communities?
Well, I can speak to our newsroom, and this is, first of all, something we talk about all the time. And we recently had an initiative called Story Makers, where kind of the idea behind it is we need to get more people of color on the radio as radio reporters. And so with the initiative, we brought 4 fellows in and trained them on radio reporting. And they each told multiple stories. And what's not surprising at all is that these stories did amazing. Like, they really resonated with our audience. So there's multiple reasons why we need more people of color and people impacted disproportionately by some of these issues to be telling these stories and to be telling other people's stories, just like many reporters already do. But in the more immediate term, a lot of times it's just thinking about who's going to be in a story. And I know that NPR has had an initiative for a long time where they track every single person that they talk to in a story. And what they found when they started the initiative was that with most of the experts they talked to, they were majority male and predominantly white. And so they started saying, okay, we need to make a concerted effort to make sure that we have more women speaking about science and economics and a lot of these more male-dominated professions, and people of color when possible. And we also do that at our station, especially with our daily talk show called Detroit Today. And so I think it's twofold. It's about changing who's telling the stories and just being really intentional about the voices included in your story, and not just having the people impacted be people of color, but be the experts and the politicians and the doctors and the rest of the voices in the story as well.
All right, thanks. So Kate, you're next. What needs to change so that journalism better centers Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities in your experience?
So I think my answers aren't too different from Laura's, and starting with number one, as 2 white journalists answering this question, we need, I run a very small shoestring newsroom, but I do run it, and number one priority has to be making sure our staff reflects both on the reporting side, but also on the business side and on the different kinds of work that we're doing that needs to reflect the community that we're reporting on. And we are doing a lot of work to make it happen, but we are absolutely not at where we want to be. And I think that's true of almost every newsroom locally and around the country. And thinking about that every day is something that every kind of person leading a team or an outlet needs to be doing. And what we kind of realized is part of what we needed to do was we needed to be working on the pipeline issue ourselves, even though we're very new and don't have a huge support infrastructure for training. We can do something, and we can help work with people who are not as familiar or is not as able to come into contact with the kind of industry and system. So the as Laura was saying, people telling the stories, people involved on the higher level of making those coverage decisions is really important. And that kind of comes through in every story that we talk about in our newsroom, even things as kind of the Whitmer plot story, to get off topic from elections for a second, just evoked really different reactions from people with different backgrounds in our newsroom, and that affected the kinds of coverage plans we wanted to make. So it's not just about siloing those stories into stories about X. It's about every story that your newsroom is doing. So I think that is the big thing for us. The other thing I would just note is and I think everyone needs to do a better job as journalists to talking to people that you like want to be centered, not on a story basis, but just talking to people, seeing what they want from you and trying to live up to that contract for them. And, not just making sure someone is quoted in a story, but figuring out what their concerns are and how you can address them in a long-term way and kind of continue that, in a relationship way and make sure you're getting the reporting that they want to see, making sure that they do see it and getting it back to them and seeing what else you can do better and being transparent about that.
Thanks. So next, Nancy and Agogo. Can you talk about some of the ways that Voters Not Politicians and All Voting is Local are centering and supporting Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities? And how can others support those voters as we approach November 3rd?
Well, I think those same principles apply to, our local, organizing and education and outreach work, right? So making sure that we have diverse voices that are, I like how Kate put it, that you are actually giving information or sharing information that is useful and that the community wants. And then as well, like when I said, you really need trusted voices and authentic kind of validators, like you can't manufacture that, right? And so you really have to build those relationships from local communities, and so that we're kind of, sharing information in a way that it'll be received, right? And so it's very organic and it needs to be effective.
And Agogo?
We have been really focused, as I know all of the groups in our broader coalition, on targeting people of color and young voters who are historically disenfranchised communities. We've sent text messages to over 645,000 voters in Michigan, giving them information about their voting rights and their voting options this year. We've also had a number of town halls. We had a town hall a couple weeks ago with Life Church Riverside and Detroit Action to open the floor and answer any and all questions about voting, what it takes to vote in this election. And I think we just have to continually do that and reach out to communities and make sure that they feel like no question is off limits, because a lot of people just, for example, Shaq is voting for the first time this year, which, this is a guy who has a PhD, has won, 4 NBA championships, and I was stunned. But there are a lot of folks out there who are very unfamiliar with voting, or they don't think it matters, and we have to reach out to them. That's part of our role, to make people feel comfortable with the voting process and feel like it matters to them.
Thanks. And, Agogo and Nancy and the ACLU were all a part of the coalition that Agogo mentioned. It's got more than 150 local grassroots partners, and it's been really a pleasure to work together this year to try and dig deeper into communities and lift up those voices, just as y'all have said. And if folks, are looking for another source of that information, the MichiganVoting.org has a lot of straightforward information based on what did that group of 100, grassroots organizations say their community needed answers to. And so Michigan has really been working for, all this entire year to provide that information. So I want to turn to some questions that we've gotten in the chats. So one question, maybe I'll start with Laura. How are you preparing for election night, perhaps this year being election week? And I'm really interested whether you've seen sort of a shift in the media's like understanding and sort of acceptance and maybe a normalizing of that that concept over this year.
Yeah, we're definitely expecting to be reporting on the election for several days after. Normally, we all this pre-pandemic, we all get assigned to like a campaign or an issue night of, and we go to their watch parties so we can get their winning speech or whatever they say once the polls close. And it always is a pretty late night. I usually wrap up after midnight. But this year, I know NPR National has sent us notices that they're planning to broadcast as late as 5 a.m. on election night, that's not normal for them. And yeah, we are just all expecting to continue to vote for several days. We were talking about doing a roundtable with poll workers to kind of debrief, and we were trying to figure out when to schedule it. We wanted it to be after the election, and we were thinking, let's do at least a week after, because that will give us more of a chance that the results will actually be in at that point. So yeah, that just gives you a little taste of how we're adjusting things this time around.
Thanks. And Kate, did you want to weigh in at all on how you're adjusting to a different sort of timeline for election week?
Sure, I'll be really transparent. Like, we have not figured it out yet. And if anything, at least the fact that we don't have a very serious, we didn't exist in 2016. So there are some things that are new for us as an outlet, that maybe the only silver lining there is we don't have to change long built-in structures, but it is just so crucial, right? We don't want to stop talking about voting right now. And so, we're trying to look ahead, but just seeing legislation or a ruling coming down about rides to the polls, which I haven't gotten into yet, but changing today, it could be changing tomorrow. It is so important to keep those things up to date, that from the perspective of informing voters about like what the changes look like to our counting and to when results come in and to that process. We're going to start trying to tackle that next week, but for now, we're still very in the present.
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of folks on this panel that would be happy to talk with you. All right, so Nancy, we have a question about, that there's kind of two narratives out there this is from a university professor, and she's talking about the narrative for her students. One narrative is that voting is crucial and a vital civic duty, and the other is that our votes won't make a difference. And I think that for all of us who are voting rights advocates, and perhaps our folks who are in the media, right, this is something that we've heard before. So what do you say to young people to encourage them to vote at a time when institutionalized racism and other systemic oppressions are casting doubt or distrust on our democratic institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I get it, right? So in 2018, we were trying to run a campaign changing our redistricting process in this state because politicians were using their power to redraw districts in order to keep themselves in power for entire decades. And so there are a lot of things like that. There are a lot of, voter suppression, tactics that unfortunately are very successful. There's, gerrymandering, which, do make people feel like their vote doesn't count. But the thing is, like, that is our most powerful tool to make change. And I really believe that in Michigan, for example, we are showing in just the last, with Prop 3 in 2018, with Prop 2 in 2018, with this massive, influx of absentee voting, that we are taking back our political power in this state for voters. And I really would encourage all, of our young folks to vote, because things are changing, and that is the way that we're going to change make real change that's systemic and lasting. And that's how it might not happen overnight, but 2018 was a watershed moment, and 2020 promises to be one. And I really do see hope in the system, and that's what we need to do to affect real change in our state.
What I always try and say is that the elected official, the billionaire, and whoever you are, you all get to vote. This is your day of this is your most equalized day. Like, exercise that power like the billionaire you are on that day.
That's right.
So, Agogo, the next question is for you. Do you have any advice for poll workers? I assume perhaps that this individual is herself a poll worker. So any, advice in this, very historic election cycle for our poll workers who are our first responders for democracy?
Well, first, thanks. This is really a crucial year. The average age of a Michigan poll worker before this year was 74 years old. So in the midst of COVID, we really needed a lot of folks to step up, and it looks like that's happening. And hats off to everyone who's decided to volunteer this year. But I think number one, pay attention in your training. You get trained once, it's for 2 hours, and you're on your own. Well, of course, you have the other people on your precinct staff with you, but it's really important to pay attention. Of course, at michigan.gov/democracy-MVP, there are some great resources that the Secretary of State's office has put together to supplement the training that you get from your local election officials. But prepare for a long day. Bring a snack, bring a charger. Make sure that if you have any questions, contact the clerk. You're not supposed to know everything, and it's okay to ask for help. I think that is the biggest thing that I've seen in my years of working at polling locations that are challenger as a poll watcher, is that poll workers get intimidated or they get frustrated and they come across something that they're not sure of, and they just want to battle through it. And it's okay to ask for help. So ask for help, be prepared for a long day, and brush up on some of the great materials that the Secretary of State's office has provided.
Thanks, Agogo. I always try and say, your job is to make sure that everybody gets the ballot that they're legally entitled to, and definitely not the opposite. You're not primarily the voting police. You are there to ensure that everyone gets the ballot they're legally entitled to. I know that Nancy, Agogo, and I are using all of our efforts this year to make sure every single voter gets the ballot they're entitled to in this state. So one more, let me scroll down for a second here. So one other question, someone asked about if folks are seeing instances, and perhaps Laura or Kate might have mentioned this. I don't want you to repeat any misinformation or any hostile information, but have you seen instances of that, in social media or anywhere? And have you seen effective responses to that? So maybe we'll start with Laura and Kate, but Nancy and Agogo, you may have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I haven't personally seen these types of messages on WhatsApp or email, and haven't personally received reports of it. I know we do have another reporter who's looking into being an immigrant and voting right now. Is kind of a umbrella story that he's working under. So he may have some more information, but it hasn't come up in any of our news meetings.
I also haven't seen any notes about discouraging people to vote, and I did a quick Google to see if I could see anything off the bat. It's multitasking, so I don't know if there is something out there I didn't see immediately, but in terms of other reporting on if this is a common phenomenon. But I guess what I would say is there is this weird thing where it feels, if someone sends you a text message, it feels, or an email personally, it feels more, there's this personal verification feeling. And if anything, there's less verification because you don't know the original source. And I found, again, as a reporter, you end up doing these things and feeling a little bit like a nag, but I get emails from family or friends, or someone shares a meme and I'm the buzzkill who says, that's not right. Like, that's from 2018, not 2020. And it's okay to interrogate your friends and family and loved ones about their sourcing and where they got something, with love and respect, of course. But
if you can't correct your own family members, right, who can do it? So I'm going to put into the chat for everyone, again, the Nonpartisan Election Protection Hotline, where you can get questions answered if your family member tells you something and then, another family member says that's not true. You can go right to the source. Legal professionals are there trained on Michigan election law. It's also a place, as perhaps everyone on this panel knows, that you can, and we really encourage you to report any voter suppression, any intimidation, any sort of issue or problem or question. You can go there. But let me give, if we can, we have about 1 more minute or 2 more minutes before we sign off. What about Agogo or Nancy? Are you seeing any of that, and are you seeing any effective responses to that?
I haven't personally, but I was just going to point people to the 866 Our Vote hotline to report any instances of intimidation like that. I think that's really important. And I think it's important for all of us to just, to keep sharing messages of support for voters. That, these are your rights. This is what you're entitled to. You're entitled to vote absentee. You're entitled to vote, in person on election day without fearing these kinds of, tactics by people. And there are people behind you, that want to help if you do encounter any of these things. And that hotline, again, 866 Our Vote is a great place to start.
Yeah, I also haven't seen anything, but I do think the one thing we should bring to the surface here is the robocall that went out from Jacob Wool. I guess it's almost 2 months ago or a month ago. Time flies in this space. But they were prosecuted. They're being prosecuted. And I think it's important to remember that voter disinformation is illegal. You're not allowed to do that. And there are a lot of election authorities, especially in Michigan, who are dedicated to making sure that if anyone does that, they are prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Well, I hope that we will talk again after Election Day and we'll be able to say that there were no additional incidents. I like to think, as a person who was a part of Proposal 3 in 2018, that we saw Michiganders fully supported access to the ballot. 80 of 83 counties in Michigan supported that ballot initiative and wanted to make it easier, simpler for voters. And I think hopefully we will continue to see that spirit here in Michigan all the way through this historic election. So I want to thank all of the panelists for joining us tonight, and also thank PEN America. And I don't think I said it earlier, but I just want to remind folks, if they want more information, you can go to, I've lost my page, I think it's pen.org. Pen.org, yes. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.